a good friend of mine, Claire Adams. Welcome very much. I'm really happy that you want to deliver this first keynote address. And Claire is a professional singer and violin player. Um, and in fact, she is almost done recording her first album. So I'm really happy that you still made up some time to deliver a keynote here. And but you're also a philosopher, and this combination is really great because you are going to talk about us, and I think in a very philosophical way about what it means to have your own creative practice and all the frictions that come with it. So yeah, for all the listeners, you can put questions in the chat. The keynote will be like around 30 minutes, but you can constantly put questions in the chat, and then I will kind of curate all those and make sure that afterwards we also have some time for Q&A. So for now, Claire, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for having me and for creating the space, to share some perspectives on how we might try to understand and act within a reality that is increasingly marked by tension and polarization. So I would like to begin by proposing a small shift in how we understand tension in general. Because rather than approaching it just as a destructive or destabilizing force, I would like to suggest that tension can also be understood as creative and maybe even as an inherent feature of our intersubjective reality. However, to think tension in this way, we might need to question whether our main frameworks or models to understand reality actually leave enough room for it. Because many of our prevailing models tend to imagine reality, mainly as something external to us, something that can be grasped through the right method and organized into stable and rational structures. But from this perspective, complexity and contradiction and fluidity appear as problems to be solved rather than as constitutive features of how reality operates. And while this way of thinking has been productive, in many respects, it also creates limitations. In particular, as I suggested, it struggles to account for complexity, porosity, and plurality in interconnected dynamics. So it often treats our constructs, our norms, categories, discourses, as a given, rather than as something that only exists through how we embody and enact them. And what's more, it also tends to organize our understanding through oppositions and clear separations, like, for example, subject and object, but also right, wrong, or us versus them. And so within this framework, tension and negativity are usually seen as disruptive forces, as something that breaks a structure or threatens a stable order, whether this disruption is perceived as dangerous or as a necessary step towards social change. But even discourses that position themselves as critical or oppositional often reproduce this limitation because they also treat tension mainly as a force of rupture rather than as something that can also operate relationally and creatively, in dialogue with other discourses. And from this perspective, I believe polarization should not come as a surprise. In context marked by increasing instability, the erosion of shared structures, and the loss of common reference points, polarization emerges as a predictable outcome. It may reflect paradigms or lenses through which we see the world that become incommunicable. And in doing so, they also remain quite unaware of their own prejudices. But these paradigms may simply be different responses to the same problematic and complex reality, to the same underlying conditions. And this is not to say that every standpoint is equally valid or to defend an arbitrary relativism, because I do believe we have the responsibility and the need to create structures and values that can organize our societies in fair and sustainable ways. But still, its paradigm may at least be informative, no, of our human needs. In this case, maybe our discomfort, our lack of stability, and our difficulty in interpreting the conditions in which we live. And so for these reasons, I would like to suggest that our current frameworks may not be sufficient for understanding the complex problems we face, no? And the interdependent nature of the problems we face. What they often fail to recognize is that tension is not an external or exceptional disruptive force, but something that is always already present in how we operate, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. There is always tension between stability and change, between convergence and divergent dynamics, and between how constructs are incorporated and enacted, no? And in being enacted, they are always deviated, even if only slightly. And so, therefore, rather than frameworks that seek to resolve tension, we might need ways to think of it that remain with it, no? That understand it as irreducible. And by frameworks, I do not mean like fixed systems, no, like absolute systems. I mean weak ontological orientations, like interpretations that help us make sense of reality while still being open to change and to adjust to it. Yet, thinking through these kind of frameworks can become quite dense and abstract. So I would like to make it more concrete without immediately jumping into fields where there is a lot at stake, no? Like we face significant dilemmas and practical impossibilities. So I would like to turn for a moment to the field of art and aesthetics, not to aestheticize these problems, but more as a source of inspiration, like a way of seeing this from a different perspective, no? And so we are used to seeing this field, art, like as separate from our everyday life, no? But art can also be understood as a kind of playground for reality. It is a field in which we experiment with our own constructs. Like we build aesthetic objects that carry values, establish forms of order, provoke affects, express ideas, no? And in doing that, they help us make sense of our surroundings, of our inner worlds, our relations to others, no? And in this sense, artistic practices can reveal a lot about our dynamics, like how things come into being, how values are created and enacted, what autonomy and creativity mean or look like, and in general, how we think about our constructs, no? Like how we think about form, normativity, hierarchy, correctness, for example. But what also makes this field particularly interesting, as an example, is that artistic experiments don't have like direct real world consequences, no? Like what I mean by this is that no one dies if an artistic experiment fails, no? There may be some consequences like professional or institutional, and art has impact, like I'm not saying that, but the freedom to try and to fail and to deviate is much greater, no, than in other domains. But yet, still in this more innocent field, art can offer some revealing analogies, because artistic practice has long struggled with similar question about its nature, no? If it has an essence, or what it does, what its autonomy means, or how it is built, no, as a relational practice. And in trying to understand itself, it has been repeatedly reduced to one of its layers or dimensions, like, for example, its formal layer or conceptual layer, no? So sometimes this reduction takes the form of closed traditions, like where specific paradigms kind of solidify into norms that define what counts as proper practice and legitimate value, no? And this we see very clearly in institutionalized art and academic context. But other times, this reduction takes the opposite form, like an emphasis on rupture and negativity. And yet, what is often missed here, especially in art, is that disruption also produces order. Because in order for an artwork to exist as such, it will need to establish some internal cohesion, no? Like some type of necessity, its own logic. And in doing so, it often becomes part of a new tradition, or it starts a new tradition. No? But still, some other times, like the formal and expressive dimension of art is kind of thrown out of the window altogether in favor of a purely conceptual gesture, as if form would just be like a necessary bridge to transmit a concept. No, this we see quite clearly in some postmodern artworks or currents. But what is often forgotten in this way of thinking is that art has a fundamental aesthetic dimension, no? Like if it's able to express something, it's through the senses. We cannot get rid or we shouldn't want to get rid of that aspect of it. So artistic practice is not primarily about expressing a concept. For that, we have philosophy, for example. And it's not about doing something right from an external point of view or following a set of rules perfectly, no? It's about the capacity of a work of art to affect us, to do something to us, and make us feel something, no? And in doing so, it may shift our perceptions and it may open up new ways of understanding ourselves and our surroundings. But the aesthetic dimension is there. So to help us understand this dimension of art and still in relation to its other layers, I would like to briefly introduce some ideas from Jordi Claramonte's theory of modal aesthetics, which, at least for me, it has been very helpful in thinking through these questions and in trying to understand art as a situated practice, no? Within a broader context. And still, compressing this theory in a few minutes might be a bit of a irresponsible simplification, but I hope it can still serve as a useful conceptual tool. So instead of understanding art, its practices and discourses as isolated entities or with a fixed essence or something like that, modal aesthetics proposes to see them as kind of points of convergence within a wider relational field. So in a visual analogy, we could see this field as a landscape formed by many threads, where these threads would be different ideas, values, forms, materials, techniques, ways of creating, no, that constitute the context, like the field where practices take shape. And so these threads, they don't belong to any single discourse. They are the historical, material, and ideological conditions in which discourses and practices emerge. And so artworks can be seen as these points of convergence, no, within this web of threads, of influences. And they have their own entity because they are woven in a specific way from their specific situation and perspective in the field, their specific mix of threads, no? And yet, there is a distinction here in modal aesthetics between what is woven together, like the artwork itself, and the dynamics that weave it together, no? The relational modes between practices and discourses. Because you can weave influences together by trying to converge it, to create a necessity, coherence, to conform to a way of doing something, but you also cannot explore the opposite, like to diverge from it, explore possibilities, deviate from them, no? So these modes can be seen as kind of modulations on the movements of convergence and divergence, but also with their negative counterparts, like contingency and impossibility, because it helps us understand more like these dynamics between them, the modes of relation between these threads that we can weave together, no? And at the same time, if we think about the artwork itself, what converges, no, it is also an entity with multiple layers. It cannot be reduced to any single one of them. Like even if we think about one layer more prominently, like as I was saying in postmodern art about the conceptual layer, we cannot get rid of the other ones, like they are there. And the work of art always exists in tension within these layers, no? So there will always be a formal component, a material component. Think of the shapes, the colors, the sound, the tonal material, like mm, how this material is formed together. Like there will always be this formal component. But there is also always like a more organic and expressive component, like what it does to your senses, where it hits your body, for example, or what it makes you feel emotionally. No, we can also not get rid of this part of art. It is there, even though it may do different things for different people. It will be caused by or not caused by the aesthetic object. No. And on top of it, but not more importantly, there is the intersubjective layer. So what this form of art expresses conceptually, but also its historical and cultural meaning, no? And so as we see, tension is not a problem to be eliminated, but it is constitutive of the artwork itself, like it's there, it exists in tension. And so what's more, this way of thinking helps us rethink the movements of convergence and divergence, as I was suggesting, because artistic practices do not simply affirm existing structures, no, or purely operate through rupture or negation. Instead, they work within this field of relations. They negotiate, they transform inherited materials and conventions and practices. So convergence and divergence are not opposites. They are interdependent movements within the same process. And also from this perspective, deviation is not something that happens from the outside. Transformation and even instability are always already present within the practice itself. Even within a specific framework or work of art, every repetition is also a variation. No? Every enactment changes these modes and the tension in which it exists. So this framework helps us understand movements of divergence and convergence between established frameworks, but it also is able to operate transversally. So thinking between frameworks, the relationships between artistic discourses. So it helps us to kind of zoom out of our own paradigm, no, our own lens, and to see different discourses not as opposing positions to be defended or rejected, but as possibilities, like different ways of listening, of seeing, of perceiving, of working that can intersect and translate to one another, and even maybe transform each other. So about this, there is a specific example I wanted to share because during my master's degree, I had the opportunity to be in an artistic environment that was very eclectic, but like deliberately very eclectic. So it was a blend of jazz musicians from all branches, classical performance, also experimental, contemporary classical performance, but also producers, more pop ones, but also more experimental ones, and in general, musicians from many different cultural backgrounds, like Chinese folk, Arab, Latin, everything. And while we were all working on our own artistic project, we needed to collaborate together in order to bring them to life, no? And so we could not stay in our own bubble, in our own way of doing things. We had to translate our way of thinking, our practices into other ways of thinking and kind of find this space in between. And the funny thing is that in doing so, we became aware of our own prejudices, our own ways of working, something we thought was natural to us. It wasn't because we needed to translate it, no? And in doing that, our ways changed, our ways of doing stuff. Like, for example, for me, approaching my kind of experimental classical background in a production environment, it completely changed how I thought about music. Like I needed to start thinking about sound design, about placement in an artificial environment, no? I started listening to texture, to frequency, something I never did before in the same way, no? And also being in the same room as jazz musician also permeated my language almost by osmosis, no? I started seeing music as a conversational and co-created process rather than seeing sheet music and having to play from it, no? And it also enriched my harmonic and rhythmic vocabulary almost without me noticing. So it did not replace my own language, but it permeated it. And this experience and ideas brings me to a slightly different notion of creativity, because as we begin to see, creativity within this framework is less about an heroic act, no, of individual genius or a way of applying rules perfectly, but is more a situated and almost recollective process, no? It is not about producing something from the nothing, but about being true to the specific position from which one is operating. It is therefore a relational practice, a way of weaving influences together, and in doing so, maybe even opening up inherited forms to new relations. However, this understanding of creativity also implies a bit of a demanding notion of autonomy. Since again, it is not about inventing your own rules or following a set of external ones perfectly, no? Instead, it requires listening to one's specific influences and also to intuition, to one's own sense of coherence and balance, and allowing the work itself to guide the process, like to discover what it needs and to stay with it, to discover the rules as they emerge through being with this aesthetic object, no? And therefore, this kind of autonomy is often quite uncomfortable because it involves not knowing in advance if something will work or how it can work. In this sense, external norms and established methods are more efficient and they also protect us from this feeling of uncertainty or from failure even, no? But once these norms are internalized, they also limit how we think and perceive and create, because we tend to stay within the options we know, we already recognize, even unconsciously. So instead, this way of thinking asks us to listen, to stay present in the process, and even stay open to serendipity or approaching one's way of working from a different angle or context or paradigm, no? So, for example, for me, as I said before, working from a production standpoint, like working in a digital audio workstation, often leads me to transitions and forms I could never have planned consciously, because they happen by chance. They happen by finding sounds, by finding samples, by messing up the session completely and finding something I find super interesting that I didn't even see as an option, no? And then it leads me to do something with it. Or on the other hand, like exploring with uh, my instruments in a different way creates space for me. For example, like blending voice and violin as one instrument, or writing on the piano, which is not my instrument, so I don't not really know what I'm doing. It allows me to have space, no, like to simply throw fingers at the piano and listen to my own preferences in that, because I have less judgment about what is right and what is wrong. So I kind of have more space and more honest expression to actually listen to what comes out and to find order in it, no? However, there is often like the assumption that this way of working might be difficult to apply or to teach, no? Since it is quite intuitive and process-based, like you need to be there, no? But that might not be the case, because it often simply requires being placed in a situation where you have to do something. You don't know how to, but you have to. And so you have to find out. Like, and then you are forced to listen and to figure out how to be there and to create something. So as I was saying, it often just means starting. It doesn't need more information or more tools or more rules. It just means starting to externalize material, improvising, returning to similar ideas, allowing order to crystallize and stay with the object you are creating, like listening to what it needs, what it does make you feel. And that becomes the rule, staying with it and learning to trust that process, even if it fails, like learning to trust that it can get this internal cohesion and you can find it out while being with it. So from this perspective, not knowing is not a lack, no? It can also be a condition of possibility. When we step into this uncertainty, we begin to encounter the limits of our own practice, our own ways of thinking, what we see as possible, no? And in being there, new relations can emerge. Again, not out of nowhere, but in dialogue with other discourses. And so this is all to say that we can, and there might be benefits of thinking tension in this way. And that in doing so, we may be able to understand ourselves and our practices from a different angle. And while this framework does not offer direct solutions to complex social or geopolitical tensions, like very concrete examples, it still may allow us to enrich our understanding of tension, no? Like not just as a conflict to be resolved, but as irreducible of how we operate, and also as a condition through which new relations and forms of life can emerge. And so before I conclude, I would like to briefly point towards some further implications of this way of thinking, especially for how we see subjectivities and the way they enter the social and political field. Because practicing autonomy in this way does not only shape what we make, it kind of reshapes us as subjects too, because it changes how we perceive, how we act, and how we enter relations. Because rather than isolated agents, no, individuals can also be understood as these points of convergence within wider relational webs. Like they are formed by histories, norms, contexts, affects, material conditions, of course. They are conditioned in this way, but they are never fully determined by them. And agency and autonomy emerge precisely in that space in between. And so artistic practice makes this dynamic particularly visible because through artistic expression, we become more aware of the discourses that shape us, that the influences that are in us, no? And how they can be modulated and deviated from. And what's more, making space for this honest expression and for listening to these specific influences, allowing these influences and preferences to crystallize into form can be seen as a way of reappropriating our own experience as subjects and of practicing this type of relational autonomy. So in this sense, art does not simply produce objects, it opens perceptual and relational possibilities, allowing different ways of being to emerge from within practice itself. And therefore, experimenting with such modes of being can be seen as political in itself, because it changes how norms are internalized and how agency is enacted and how new relations are shaped. So yes, I would like to conclude and to thank you very much for listening to this presentation. And I hope that these ideas may have offered some conceptual tools or some ways of thinking that might stay with tension and with complexity and try to understand them in more relational ways. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Claire, for this beautiful lecture and amazing defense of the arts and why it's so valuable for everybody. I can say that that's at least one big takeaway. There are some beautiful remarks also in the chat, Claire. You should definitely also check them out. But for the remaining time, I would love to give as much room as possible for questions. So if people have questions, please raise your hand. So then naturally some kind of a row of questions will arise, and I will try just to deal with as many, or Claire you will have to answer them, but I will try to organize them so that as many as people as possible can ask questions. So yeah, just raise your hand, and I will give you the floor. Yes, I'm also. Yes, Joanne.
Yes, I have a question about artificial intelligence. If an AI entity is one of your collaborators, will you have a different perspective towards some of the issues you've been talking about, some of the tensions you've been talking about? And I know you have a lot of responses already, so I'll just allow you to riff on that. Thank you so much for a great talk.
Thank you. Well, actually, I don't know if I would approach it differently because I kind of think of artificial intelligence as something that, of course, can apply rules very efficiently. No, it does a lot of what we try to do much more efficiently than us. But sometimes it needs instructions, no, to make jumps, to blend. Different paradigms also at least in my experience, and I do talk a lot with ChatGPT. It is still not in my head, no, like even if I wanted to do something like in a certain way, like it does not position itself in this situated place, what I was talking about, like this autonomous place in a relational field. You kind of need to guide it there, and of course it has like a lot of information that maybe you are not able to gather in a lifetime, no, but you, in order to get sense, like some type of sense of it, you have to guide it there. You have to make these jumps, and you have to be creative in how you blend these influences. So to me, it is still like a very useful tool. And it is scary how good, like even in music, there are these artists that are completely AI, and they are gaining like a lot of streams and everything. But like in my experience, they are, at least in genres where it is a very constructed language, and then they do it perfectly, of course, but like it is not about constructing a new language, or like opening new ways of relation. Like they create perfectly something that is already a constructed language. So in that sense, like this is how I experience, at least like artificial experiment, like intelligence in my practice. But of course, there are a lot of different ways of seeing it, and I don't know how it will evolve. Of course, like no one does, I guess. Yeah.
No, thank you so much, Claire. Are there any other questions? Um, Otherwise, I have some very
I,
interesting questions that
I have a
yeah.
question.
Oh, great, Morris. Yes, go ahead.
It's actually more of an acknowledgement. I want to say thank you. It was an amazing presentation, and for me, it is the philosophical kind of academic introduction that I would have given if I'd have had more time in my workshop, which is only 20 minutes. So thank you for doing the job for me.
Okay, I'm happy. I'm happy about that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Um, if there are no other is there questions, just raise your hand. Oh, there's another one. And now I'm going to look you up. You can also just start speaking because I have to look you up on the list. Penny Hay.
Oh, hello. Thank you, Claire. That was really brilliant. And yes, I agree. Your smile lights up the room. It was just based on your comment about trying to find it in the chat, that you use the term art as a playground for reality. But obviously, I'm particularly interested in the imagination. So could you kind of expand on that in relation to the concept of imagination?
Like what I meant more about, yeah, playground for reality, it would be more in the sense that it allows us to explore our constructs, no? Like it is more in relation that reality is also in this space in between, no? Like we build on the constructs we have with each other, which I don't mean they don't exist or they only exist in our heads, no, but they exist in this space in between, no, in how we incorporate and enact them. And in this sense, like art is the place to explore these relations, how we relate to each other, how we experience balance and constructs, and we make something from them, no? So that is what I meant a bit with this playground for reality. But of course, like it has all to do with imagination and how to kind of feel the limits of it and where it can get. But it's also like it is not disconnected to the influences of everyday life. So it also exists in this space in between. Like I don't think like imagination can be in another dimension, no? That then all the influences we gather throughout our experience, our life, our context, our taste, values, and everything. So I think it's more about like when imagination steps in to make new relations, to think other types of possibilities, no, between them. I don't think it's like a different layer to kind of get disconnected from this web of relations, but it's a way to kind of weave them differently, to think like, oh wait, but it is not necessary to do this in this way, no? Maybe like these guys are doing it totally differently, and why can I not approach it from this perspective, even if I want to do this other thing, no? And I think imagination kind of helps us there. I hope it kind of gives an answer to your question. I don't know if I did, but
yeah, well explained. I know Rami wants to come in, but just quickly to say, yeah, your concept of the web and the threads fits beautifully with the metaphor that we use around forests and learning like a forest. But maybe a follow-up call about, I'd be interested to know which theories or theorists you lean on in this, but maybe let's follow up on that. But thanks, Claire.
Okay, no problem. Yes.
Thank you so much. There's another question from Rami.
Yeah, and it's really just a follow-up. If you were to write yourself a letter to the self you were 10 years ago to advise what to anticipate as what you've learned are the constraints today, so that the you 10 years from now can receive that letter knowing that you're practicing what we're doing, what we're sharing. Like within your own awareness today of the next 5 and 10 years, where do you find the constraints? Where do you anticipate the pinches and the bottlenecks to be?
Wow, yeah, like I can actually start answering that like from what you were saying about like where you were like 10 years ago, for example. Like this way of thinking helped me a lot because I was brought up in a very like closed traditional way of thinking about art and music, and I have to say like it was almost like this external layer that killed all understanding of what it actually is. No, it was just it was a way of doing stuff that you had to conform to. So like it was a complete different notion of it, and I had to kind of get rid of it completely because it wasn't serving me. Like I didn't understand what art was about in that kind of framework, no? So this type of theories of being in practice, of finding out that you don't align with certain values and everything, like that is what brings me to this standpoint today. But how it can evolve, especially like in this changing landscape as we were talking about, I don't know, and I don't know if I would like to predict it, because I think like part of thinking in this way is to encounter it, and a lot of what I have encountered, I could never have predicted it. So I think it's more about like this feeling of staying open to that and to keep listening to make space to things to happening, no? And yeah, so I would tell myself to try to keep doing that and stay open to what it can become, rather than kind of again like trying to grasp a way of doing things and stay stuck in it. I don't know, like I from now for this perspective, I think I would tell myself that, but I don't know, maybe it changes in a couple of years.
Well, I with 25 years practice, and I'm still learning, I'm still doing the exact same thing. So I can only be encouraging to not stop, not give up.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Claire, for that beautiful answer to that last beautiful question. I think that really is also really beautiful way of rounding up this session. Thank you again so much for your, I think, amazing, beautiful lecture, which were so many ideas and thoughts. We can definitely chew on, let them resonate, and also have like a 10-minute break to prepare for the next session. So, but again, thank you, Claire. Thank you so very, very much. I'm really happy that you wanted to do this for us. So thank you.
Of course, and thank you all so much for listening and for the nice thoughts and for resonating with it. Thank you very much.